Every day, without realizing it, you unlock your phone and fall into the scroll. Minutes blur into hours. You didn't plan to stay. You didn't even enjoy most of what you saw, yet something kept pulling you downward, post after post, clip after clip. This isn't laziness. It isn't weak willpower. It's chemistry. And at the center of it all is dopamine. Dopamine is often called the pleasure chemical, but that name is misleading. Dopamine isn't about pleasure itself. It's about anticipation. It's the chemical that whispers, just one more. It doesn't reward you for what you've already seen. It drives you toward what might come next. The next post could be funnier. The next video could be shocking. The next notification could change everything. That possibility is what hijacks your attention. Social media platforms didn't accidentally become addictive. They were engineered around this very mechanism. Infinite scrolling removes natural stopping points. No page numbers. No end credits. Just a bottomless well of novelty. Every swipe becomes a small gamble, and dopamine loves uncertainty. The brain releases more dopamine when rewards are unpredictable. That's why slot machines and social feeds operate on the same psychological principle. Your brain, however, evolved in a very different world. Dopamine once helped humans survive, motivating them to hunt, explore, and seek food. Today, that same system is being exploited by glowing rectangles in your hand. The brain can't distinguish between meaningful rewards and digital ones. It only knows stimulation. What makes this more dangerous is how subtle it feels. There's no dramatic moment where you realize you've lost control. Instead, attention erodes quietly. Focus weakens. Silence becomes uncomfortable. The mind begins to crave constant input, even when the content itself feels empty. Over time, this changes how you think. Deep focus becomes harder. Boredom feels unbearable. And moments that once brought calm, waiting in line, sitting alone, thinking, now feel like something to escape from. So you scroll again. This is not a personal failure. It's a systemic one. You are living inside an attention economy where your focus is the product, and dopamine is the bait. Understanding this is the first step toward reclaiming your mind, because once you see the mechanism clearly, you can begin to step beyond the scroll. One of the biggest misconceptions about dopamine is that it makes you happy. It doesn't. In fact, dopamine can increase anxiety, restlessness, and dissatisfaction when overstimulated. Dopamine doesn't say, "This feels good." It says, "Go get more." And that distinction changes everything. When you scroll, you're not chasing joy. You're chasing potential. Each swipe carries the promise of something better than the last. But most of the time, that promise goes unfulfilled. Instead of satisfaction, you're left with a strange emptiness, followed by the urge to keep going. This is the dopamine loop. Think of dopamine as a motivation engine. It fuels desire, not fulfillment. When desire is constantly triggered without meaningful resolution, the brain becomes overstimulated yet undernourished. You feel busy but unfulfilled, entertained but unsatisfied. Over time, your baseline dopamine levels shift. What once felt exciting now feels normal. What once felt normal now feels boring. This is tolerance. The same mechanism behind addiction applies here. Not because social media is evil, but because the brain adapts rapidly to repeated stimulation. This is why everyday life can begin to feel dull compared to the intensity of the feed. Conversations feel slower. Reading feels harder. Even watching a full movie without checking your phone can feel uncomfortable. Your brain has been trained to expect constant novelty. And here's the paradox. The more dopamine you chase, the less pleasure you feel. High dopamine doesn't equal happiness. It often leads to restlessness, impulsivity, and dissatisfaction. You're always reaching, rarely arriving. The platforms benefit from this imbalance. A calm, satisfied mind doesn't scroll endlessly. A restless one does. So the system rewards content that provokes outrage, shock, comparison, or fear, anything that spikes dopamine quickly. Understanding this reveals a powerful truth. If scrolling leaves you drained instead of fulfilled, it's not because you're doing it wrong. It's because dopamine was never meant to be your source of happiness. True fulfillment comes from slower chemicals, serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, released through connection, meaning, effort, and rest. But these don't spike instantly. They require presence. And presence is exactly what the dopamine loop steals. If every post on your feed were boring, you'd stop scrolling. If every post were amazing, you'd also stop. The real hook lies in unpredictability. Psychologists call this variable reward scheduling, and it's one of the most powerful behavioral conditioning tools ever discovered. This principle was first observed in experiments with animals. When rewards were given randomly, subjects became more obsessed, more persistent, and more resistant to stopping. The uncertainty made the behavior stronger. Social media uses the same logic. You never know what's coming next. A joke, a memory, a piece of bad news, a validation hit in the form of likes or comments. That uncertainty keeps dopamine firing. Your brain treats each scroll like a pull on a slot machine. What makes this especially effective is how personal it feels. The algorithm adapts to you. It learns your triggers, what makes you pause, react, or feel something. Over time, it becomes eerily accurate at delivering content that keeps you emotionally engaged, whether positively or negatively. Dopamine doesn't care if the emotion is joy or anger. It only cares that you're activated. Outrage can be just as addictive as pleasure. That's why controversial content spreads faster than calm, thoughtful material. This constant emotional activation exhausts the nervous system. Your brain is rarely at rest. Even when you're not scrolling, part of your attention remains fragmented, waiting for the next hit of stimulation. The danger isn't just wasted time. It's the erosion of agency. When behavior is driven by unpredictable rewards, conscious choice weakens. You don't decide to scroll, you respond. And the longer this continues, the more difficult it becomes to tolerate stillness. Silence starts to feel like deprivation. Your mind equates lack of stimulation with lack of meaning. But meaning doesn't arrive through randomness. It arrives through depth, intention, and sustained focus, states that variable reward systems actively disrupt. Recognizing this mechanism doesn't immediately break the habit, but it gives you power. Because once you understand that the scroll is designed to keep you uncertain, you can begin to question whether what you're chasing is actually worth your attention. Before the age of constant notifications, attention worked differently. You could focus on a single task, a single thought, a single conversation for long stretches of time. The mind would wander, yes, but it would return. Today, that rhythm is broken. Dopamine-driven platforms don't just steal time. They fracture attention itself. Every notification, vibration, or visual cue trains your brain to switch contexts rapidly. One moment you're reading, the next you're watching a clip, then responding to a message, then scrolling again. Each switch releases a small burst of dopamine, reinforcing the behavior. Over time, your brain begins to prefer switching over sustaining. This is called attention fragmentation. Instead of deep focus, your mind operates in short bursts, constantly scanning for the next stimulus. The result is mental fatigue without meaningful progress. You feel busy, yet nothing feels complete. Dopamine plays a central role here. Novelty triggers it instantly, while sustained effort releases it slowly, if at all. So your brain learns an unconscious rule: avoid depth, chase novelty. Reading a long article feels harder than scrolling headlines. Listening deeply feels harder than skimming reactions. Thinking feels heavier than consuming. This isn't because you've become incapable. It's because your reward system has been retrained. Focus no longer feels rewarding. Distraction does. And the more fragmented your attention becomes, the harder it is to access states of flow, creativity, and clarity. There's also an emotional cost. Fragmented attention leads to fragmented thinking. Ideas don't fully form. Feelings don't fully process. You move from stimulus to stimulus without integration. This can increase anxiety because the mind never settles long enough to resolve anything. Silence becomes uncomfortable not because it's empty, but because it reveals mental noise you've been avoiding. So you fill the gap again with the scroll. The platforms benefit from this fractured state. A focused mind questions. A distracted one reacts. Fragmentation keeps you engaged but shallow, stimulated but unsatisfied. What's important to understand is that this state isn't permanent. The brain is plastic. Just as it learned to fragment, it can relearn to focus. But the first step is awareness. When you notice how often your attention jumps, how quickly boredom appears, how reflexively you reach for stimulation, you begin to see the cost, not just in time, but in depth. And depth is where meaning lives. To move beyond the scroll, you don't need to eliminate technology. You need to rebuild your relationship with attention itself. Because attention is not just a skill, it's the gateway to your inner life. And whatever controls your attention ultimately shapes who you become. Every scroll places you in a silent competition you never agreed to enter. Faces, bodies, lifestyles, achievements, opinions, endlessly paraded before your eyes. Even when you tell yourself you're just watching, your brain is measuring, comparing, ranking. This process is automatic, and dopamine plays a hidden role in it. Social validation, likes, shares, comments, triggers dopamine because it signals social approval. In evolutionary terms, approval meant safety and belonging. Today, that ancient system is activated by numbers on a screen. Each notification becomes a mini reward. Each absence becomes a quiet loss. When you see someone else receiving attention, your brain registers it as a missed reward. Dopamine doesn't just motivate pursuit, it highlights scarcity. They have something. Do you? This creates a subtle tension that keeps you scrolling, seeking either validation or distraction from the lack of it. The problem is that digital validation is unstable. It spikes quickly and fades just as fast. A post performs well, dopamine rises, mood lifts. Then the attention slows. Dopamine drops. The crash follows. This can feel like emptiness, irritability, or self-doubt, often without a clear reason. Comparison intensifies this cycle. You don't compare your full life to others' full lives. You compare your behind the scenes to their highlights. Dopamine amplifies the emotional impact, making curated moments feel like proof of superiority or failure. Over time, this erodes self-perception. Your sense of worth becomes externally referenced. Mood becomes tied to metrics. Creativity becomes performative. Instead of asking what matters to me, the brain asks what will get a response. This shifts motivation from intrinsic to extrinsic. You stop doing things because they feel meaningful and start doing them because they might be rewarded. Dopamine, once again, drives behavior, but not toward fulfillment. And when validation doesn't come, the brain looks for another hit, another post, another scroll, another comparison. The cycle continues. What makes this especially dangerous is how normalized it feels. Everyone is doing it. Everyone is exposed. So the quiet psychological toll goes unnoticed. But the cost is real. Chronic comparison increases anxiety, reduces self-esteem, and fragments identity. You become a version of yourself shaped by reaction rather than reflection. Stepping beyond this requires a shift from seeking approval to cultivating alignment, from chasing dopamine to choosing meaning, because no amount of digital validation can replace the stability that comes from knowing who you are without an audience watching. At some point, boredom stopped being a pause and became a problem. Waiting in line, sitting alone, even resting. These moments now feel uncomfortable, almost urgent, as if something is missing. The instinctive response is to reach for stimulation, to scroll, to fill the space. But boredom isn't the enemy. Dopamine has simply trained you to fear it. Boredom is the absence of immediate reward. And in a dopamine-saturated world, the brain interprets that absence as deprivation. When stimulation drops, dopamine levels fall, and the mind signals discomfort. This isn't danger, it's withdrawal. The brain has grown accustomed to constant novelty, so stillness feels wrong. Yet boredom serves a critical psychological function. It's the state where the mind begins to turn inward. When external input quiets, internal processes activate, memories surface, emotions process, ideas connect. This is why creativity often emerges in moments of idle wandering, showers, walks, quiet evenings. Boredom opens the door. Dopamine-driven habits close that door. When every spare second is filled, the brain never gets the chance to integrate experience. Thoughts remain shallow. Emotions remain unresolved. The mind becomes reactive instead of reflective. There's also a deeper layer. Many people avoid boredom because it reveals discomfort they've been numbing. Restlessness, loneliness, uncertainty. Dopamine provides escape, not resolution, escape. So boredom feels threatening because it brings you back to yourself. This is why detoxing from constant stimulation often feels worse before it feels better. The initial drop in dopamine exposes what's been buried. Anxiety may rise. Thoughts may race. This isn't damage. It's awareness returning. The brain, however, is adaptable. When you allow boredom without immediately escaping it, your dopamine baseline slowly resets. Small things regain significance. Focus strengthens. Presence deepens. The world feels less flat. Boredom isn't empty. It's fertile. It's the space where imagination grows and meaning reorganizes itself. But only if you stay long enough. The goal isn't to eliminate stimulation, but to reclaim your tolerance for stillness. To sit without needing to be entertained. To let the mind breathe. Because when you stop running from boredom, you stop running from yourself. And beyond that threshold, past the discomfort, past the urge to scroll, is a quieter, deeper form of attention. One that doesn't chase dopamine, but creates something lasting in its place. Breaking free from dopamine hijacking doesn't require deleting every app or retreating into isolation. The goal isn't rejection, it's recalibration. Your reward system can be rewired, not by force, but by intention. The brain doesn't need less dopamine. It needs dopamine in the right places. Dopamine becomes problematic when it's divorced from effort and meaning. Endless scrolling delivers reward without contribution. To rebalance this, you reintroduce effort before reward. This is how the brain was designed to function. Start small. Delay gratification. When the urge to scroll appears, pause for just a few seconds. That pause interrupts the automatic loop. You're teaching your brain that impulse doesn't equal action. Over time, this gap grows and control returns. Next, attach dopamine to depth. Activities like reading, writing, learning, exercising, or creating release dopamine slowly and sustainably. At first, they may feel less stimulating than scrolling. That's normal. Your baseline has been inflated. Stay with the discomfort. As the system recalibrates, these activities begin to feel rewarding again. Structure matters. The brain craves predictability when novelty is reduced. Set specific times for high-stimulation activities. When dopamine spikes are contained, they stop leaking into every moment. This restores contrast, making rest restful and effort meaningful. Another key is friction. Dopamine thrives on ease. Add small barriers to compulsive behaviors. Disable non-essential notifications. Keep your phone out of reach during focus tasks. These aren't punishments. They're environmental cues that support intention. Social connection also plays a role. Dopamine is not the only motivator. Oxytocin, released through genuine connection, creates a sense of safety and belonging that reduces compulsive seeking. Conversations without screens. Presence without performance. These experiences stabilize the nervous system. Most importantly, shift your internal question. Instead of asking, "What do I feel like doing?" ask, "What kind of mind do I want to build?" Every choice reinforces a neural pathway. Attention is trained, not fixed. Rewiring doesn't happen overnight. The brain resists change because familiarity feels safe. But each time you choose depth over distraction, you weaken the old loop and strengthen a new one. This isn't about discipline. It's about alignment. When your actions match your values, dopamine supports you instead of controlling you. You don't need to escape the digital world. You need to stop letting it decide what deserves your attention. When people realize how deeply dopamine has shaped their habits, the first instinct is often drastic change. Delete everything. Disappear. Go offline completely. This urge makes sense. It's a reaction to overload. But extremes rarely heal the nervous system. They shock it. Digital fasting can be useful, but only when approached with intention. A short break from constant stimulation allows dopamine levels to stabilize and reveals how dependent the brain has become. The problem arises when fasting is treated as punishment rather than recalibration. The brain doesn't learn balance through deprivation alone. It learns through contrast. When stimulation is removed entirely, the mind may feel calm at first, then restless, then craving. When the fast ends, dopamine floods back, often stronger than before. The cycle repeats. True balance isn't about absence. It's about boundaries. It's about choosing when and why you engage, rather than reacting automatically. Scheduled use restores agency. Mindless use erodes it. Another issue with extremes is identity conflict. Modern life is digital. Connection, creativity, and opportunity often live online. When you frame technology as the enemy, you create internal tension. The brain resists what feels like loss. Balance works because it doesn't demand rejection, only discernment. Dopamine responds well to rhythm. Periods of focus followed by rest. Engagement followed by reflection. When digital use is clustered instead of scattered, the nervous system relaxes. Attention deepens. One effective practice is intentional entry. Before opening an app, pause and name your purpose. Information, connection, expression. When the purpose is fulfilled, exit. This simple ritual disrupts the infinite loop and restores conscious choice. Equally important is intentional rest, not passive consumption, but genuine rest, silence, nature, unstructured time. These moments restore dopamine sensitivity and reintroduce the brain to subtler forms of reward. Balance also requires compassion. You will slip. You will scroll mindlessly again. The goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. Shame only strengthens compulsive behavior. Curiosity weakens it. Ask not, "How do I quit?" but "How do I relate differently?" When technology serves your values, dopamine becomes a tool rather than a trap. When it doesn't, it quietly shapes you from the inside out. Balance is not found in extremes. It's found in conscious repetition. Small choices, made daily, that reclaim your attention one moment at a time. What you pay attention to doesn't just fill your time, It shapes who you become. Attention is the gateway through which experience enters the mind. Over time, repeated attention turns into beliefs, habits, preferences, and identity. Dopamine influences this process quietly but powerfully. When your attention is constantly pulled by algorithms, outrage, comparison, and novelty, your inner world begins to mirror that chaos. Thoughts become reactive. Emotions become exaggerated. Patience thins. The mind adapts to what it consumes most. This isn't philosophical. It's neurological. Neural pathways strengthen with use. The content you engage with repeatedly becomes the mental environment you live in. If your attention is fragmented, your sense of self fragments with it. Dopamine accelerates this conditioning. It doesn't just motivate behavior. It marks experiences as important. Whatever spikes dopamine gets tagged as worthy of repetition. Over time, your brain starts prioritizing stimuli over substance, reaction over reflection. This is why many people feel disconnected from themselves, despite being constantly engaged. They're busy consuming, but rarely choosing. Identity becomes externally shaped rather than internally cultivated. Reclaiming attention is therefore an act of self-definition. When you choose what to focus on, you choose what kind of mind you're building. Depth creates coherence. Repetition creates character. Consider the difference between spending an hour scrolling versus an hour reading, creating, or reflecting. Both occupy time, but only one leaves a trace. One fragments, the other integrates. Attention also determines values. What you consistently observe becomes what you unconsciously value. If your feed is filled with conflict, the world feels hostile. If it's filled with perfection, you feel inadequate. The mind absorbs tone as much as content. This doesn't mean you should avoid reality. It means you should curate it consciously, not to live in a bubble, but to protect your capacity for clarity. There's power in choosing slowness in a fast world, in choosing depth when distraction is easier. These choices don't make you disconnected. They make you grounded. The question isn't, what am I watching? It's, who is this shaping me into? Because attention, once given repeatedly, becomes identity in motion. And the more you reclaim it, the more you return to yourself. The scroll never announces itself as a threat. It arrives as comfort, distraction, connection, relief. It fills empty moments and quiet spaces. But slowly, almost invisibly, it begins to decide what you notice, what you feel, and what you avoid. Dopamine doesn't take control all at once. It nudges, rewards, and repeats. To move beyond the scroll is not to reject technology, pleasure, or stimulation. It is to reclaim authority over your inner life. It is to decide consciously what deserves your attention and what does not. Dopamine is not your enemy. It is a tool. When aligned with effort, purpose, and meaning, it drives growth, curiosity, and creativity. When hijacked by endless novelty, it fractures focus and replaces fulfillment with craving. The difference lies in awareness. Every moment of attention is a vote for the kind of mind you are building, a vote for the kind of life you are shaping. Most of these votes are cast unconsciously, but they don't have to be. Reclaiming attention begins with presence, not constant vigilance, but gentle noticing. When you feel the pull to scroll, ask what you're actually seeking. Stimulation, escape, validation, rest. Often, the need beneath the habit points toward something more nourishing. Choose depth where possible. Choose silence occasionally. Choose boredom when it appears. These choices don't make life smaller. They make it clearer. A focused mind is not a rigid mind. It's a spacious one. One that can think deeply, feel fully, and rest without fear. This is what dopamine balance restores. Not productivity alone, but peace. The world will continue to compete for your attention. Algorithms will grow smarter. Stimulation will become faster, louder, more personalized. The question is not whether the pull will disappear, it won't. The question is whether you will meet it unconsciously or with clarity. Beyond the scroll lies a different rhythm of living. Slower, deeper, more intentional. A life where technology serves awareness instead of replacing it. You don't need to consume less to be worthy. You need to choose more deliberately. And when you do, dopamine stops pulling you outward and begins supporting the life you are intentionally creating. This is the return to yourself. This is the work. And this is the Pulsora Psyche. If this resonated with you, don't just scroll past awareness. Subscribe to the Pulsora Psyche and reclaim your attention, one thought at a time.